a lot of people think there's a lot of merit to this, is that whatever large organisms first stumbled upon this weird sexual reproduction stuff that didn't happen for the first billion years or so of life.
The first fuckers.
The
kinkiest organisms in history.
Keep on sounding, honeys.
Welcome to the Mind Under Matter podcast. I'm Shane Mauss, sitting here with my good friend Ramin Nazer.
Today Howdy doody, everyone.
Howdy doody? Have you said that to anyone like
Never.
In real life?
Not even in fictional life or real life. That's a first time drop.
I throw a lot of howdies out there.
I do howdy, just not howdy doody.
Yeah,
which I don't know if it's duty or duty. Like I'm doing my duty as an American.
Yeah, it's weird because howdy's like abbreviated for how do you do. And
I didn't know that.
How do you do duty? Is the extended version of. I don't know where howdy doody came from, and I may be wrong on that too. But I'm pretty sure that's the case.
How do you doody? How do you do? I say howdy to my neighbors, and I say howdy neighbor a lot because I don't know my neighbors' names.
Yeah,
I say howdy neighbor. All good, good.
Yeah, I say howdy quite a bit at pickleball, and then I found that it's either contagious or whatever, but now there's a lot more howdies going around the pickleball court.
Speaking of contagions, yes. Which we would love a pandemic of howdies. That would be great if we got howdy to spread to the farthest reaches of the indigenous tribes.
People can't stop saying howdy. We don't know exactly where this infectious greeting started.
And then the edgiest comedians are like, you can't say hello anymore. And then in the late 2000s, you could say hello. Now, if you don't say howdy, they cancel you.
So yeah, this is the pandemic history episode. Super looking forward to this one for so many reasons. Has a lot to do with evolution. For as scary as viruses are and everything else, the very reason why we are here in the way that we are is also influenced by viruses and many of the evolutionary
anthropoid
factors.
Apes? In what level?
You'll
unpack that?
I'll unpack that for sure.
My goal is always to get you to unpack all you've got within the first 3 seconds so that the rest of the episode, we just don't know what to talk about.
I could start unpacking, but I also
slowly unwrap, slowly peel the tape off, fold the tape, fold out the corners of the present, let it air out.
Oh man, I really want to do that because if I can at least mentally do that on a podcast, that will be the first time that I've done anything that resembles neatly unfolding and folding and delicately unwrapping a present in a bow and putting a bow back on. And oh my goodness, that is not a description of my personality or life. But if I can do that with my mind on this episode, boy, would that be something.
You get the gift out of the box, though. You always get the gift out of the box.
Another thing that I love is how much it has to say about our conscious experience and how much it has to say about the way in which our intuitions were formed, the way in which our disease avoidance evolved, what it was for, the differences in our modern era, and some reflecting on some of the past pandemics is a really fun way to see things a little more objectively, if not still quite imperfectly. But man, it's just, I said this weeks ago when saying we're going to talk about these stories. As we get into some of the more modern stuff, it really, so many of how these things were discovered, just any one of these diseases or pandemics, even really obscure ones that hardly impacted any humans at all, like like there's this Hydra, I think that's
the snake.
It's I believe it's a city in Australia.
Named Hydra, named after the snake, named after the 3-headed snake, or 100-headed snake. How many heads does that thing have?
There was, they're famous for racehorsing in this small town in Australia, and there was
horse racing.
Yeah, and there was
horsing.
Horse racing. What did I say?
Race horsing. It sounds like race.
Did I say race horsing?
Yeah, I thought it was like had to do with race, and you like horse them around or something.
I didn't even hear that. That's amazing.
Maybe racehorses, because like racehorse is a word, but race horsing, it sounds weird.
Yeah,
it's like
horse racing.
Horse racing.
That's amazing.
Race horsing.
That's a fun one. Horse, they're known for horse racing, and they had this very peculiar disease spring up in horses that then ended up killing some humans as well. Not many. It was never that big of a deal. It probably never will be that big of a deal, but it's also a thing that needs to still be monitored. But finding out about it and how they discovered it and the conspiracies and the blame and everything that came along with even just like the smallest, most obscure thing is utterly fascinating. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And so I guess to start things off, I think going back to the very beginning of life on Earth, because viruses were and bacteria and parasites, these were some of the first things to evolve. So
viruses before humans, or before even, or of course before humans, before fish.
Yeah, it was. So I don't know a lot about the first billion years of life on this planet, which
me neither.
Seems
that
like
makes both of us.
It seems like a big blind spot, but it's also everything was really, really small at that time, and I'm not great at, because it's small. It's very like jargony and specific, and you got to get into like proteins and
hydroprotozoan balactoid.
Yeah, and it's just it's a bit much for me. It's a little harder to conceptualize the sort of the smaller details, but at just the bare bones, anyone can kind of understand this concept. Their very, very simple life formed, and then it just started getting a little larger and a little more complex. Everything eventually kind of, is finding a way to get as much energy from the sun, whether it's, plants.
More surface area. So like by banding together different cells, like you have a bigger surface area to take in sunlight.
Mm-hmm. And then, when plants can use photosynthesis to get and store energy, then there's opportunities for something to eat those plants to get and store energy. Then there's opportunities for things to eat the things that eat the plants. And then there's also, there's like, as you get up the food chain, there's also more toxins and things that come along with that. But that first little bit of life was small. It was, you're looking under a microscope is the size of this stuff, and fairly simple-ish compared to, say, a mammal today. And then as they got larger, viruses and bacteria and stuff found an opportunity to basically leech resources off of these larger organisms. They're smaller.
Sticking it to the man. And at the time, the man was just another cell.
And they're also just, the thing that bacteria and such has going for it is that it proliferates so fast, and its generations are so quick in comparison to larger things that they evolve much quicker. And that is to say that it's not in a direction that's like consciously serving it. It's just in that everything that first billion years pretty much was just copying itself. And in making these complex copies of itself, once in a while there's small errors. Almost all of those errors are not advantageous, but once in a while there's an error that gives it a little bit of an advantage. So,
and that's a feature, not a bug, right? Like the error it's hard to say whether it's intentional or not intentional, but it's a strategy almost to not put all your eggs in one basket by copying yourself. If you deviate, then you can throw the virus off or something, right?
Definitely that's what eventually kind of got selected for and proliferated quite a bit more on Earth. But in the beginning, I mean, it was trying is a tricky word to use, but you could say that it was trying to make exact copies. I mean, from a genetic perspective, it's within your interest to. It's theoretically within your interest to pass 100% of your genes on rather than less than 100% of your genes. That's on the.
What about the diarrhea gene?
The diarrhea gene's trying to survive just like everything else out there. Everyone's trying to get ahead.
I guess, yeah, from its perspective, it's not a diarrhea gene. It's just I'm Rick. And like, I want to stay alive.
Yeah. And everything, like what is good, what is bad. That's all. These are moral judgments that evolution also gave us a preference for, where something like diarrhea is absolutely revolting to us. But for some lucky bit of plant life that has diarrhea sprayed on it, that's a good day. You just got fertilized.
Honey, you won't believe the day I had at work today. We're going out to eat tonight. The
gods shined upon me today. So once bacteria and parasites started evolving and figuring out ways to just mooch energy off of these larger organisms, these larger organisms that would then have and this is all stuff that I knew well before COVID and was fascinated by. And then I'll get into some of the stuff that I've learned about more modern history since COVID.
It would be fun if we never mentioned COVID, but it's too late. But we do a whole pandemic history and ends in 2019.
I'm intentionally going to try to keep COVID out of this a little bit, even though it's fun to take a look and compare it to past histories and stuff. But my conscious intention at the moment, which I'm sure I'll break, is to keep that kind of a little bit separate. But
did I tell you I was on my friend Zed Cutsinger's podcast and I had briefly mentioned COVID and he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, COVID is not canon in this podcast universe. We're gonna have to edit that out." And he's intentionally made a podcast where no one mentions COVID at all during any of it. It's quite astonishing. Excellent podcast. So You Did a Thing is what it's called. But I think
that's fun.
It's interesting to compare past pandemics with this one, but as far as just the regular, like no one wants to hear the history of 2020.
No,
we got enough 2020.
We aren't doing that.
Yeah.
So there's, and there's, again, in terms of like the very small, there's a lot of nuts and bolts of how the immune system works and how different varying viruses work that I simply don't know enough about. I don't know any chemistry.
Not even hydrogen?
No.
Not even oxygen?
No.
What about dihydrogen monoxide?
Keep it away from me. That's what I say. Even when I take a class and learn a bit of this stuff, the amount of time that I retain it for is dramatically shorter than a lot of the other things that I'm more interested in.
I was always shit at balancing equations. And I remember in high school, our chemistry teacher.
Equation.
It was always multiple choice tests. And the worst part was all the multiple choice answers were right, but the decimal point was different. So like they always just screwed you on the absolute detail. You couldn't just kind of guess it right.
Yeah.
I don't know. Balancing equations was tough at the advanced level.
Yeah. In chemistry, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, chemistry I was never good at. I think I took 2 chemistry classes. But I like balancing mathematical equations. That's fun.
Now that, give me those all day long. But if you're talking about nitrogen dioxide mixed with sodium hydrofluorate, then get that away from me. It's an old chemistry joke. Just say phospholite fluorophene. Oh, it's an old chemistry line.
So these once larger organisms were then being taken advantage of by these smaller like hanger-ons or whatever, then ones that started evolving like more rudimentary immune systems in the beginning that would have these internal mechanisms to attack and protect them from bacteria and such, though there was an advantage there. But the problem with getting larger is that it makes your generations longer as well. And as your generations become longer, whatever kind of immune system that you're built with, it is slightly impacted by the environment, and there's epigenetic kind of activations and such that happen along the way. But just bare bones simplified, the immune system that you're born with, if you're a larger organism, that's what you got for life. And then you have these bacteria or whatever that are evolving much quick. They're having so many generations in a single day of your life. If you're taking, say, 30 years to reproduce offspring to switch up that immune system again. And if you're trying to copy yourself, if these larger organisms are just trying to clone themselves, then there's no way to change up that immune system. And it's actually one of the ideas of why we have sex in the first place, which is
at least why I do. I only do it for the viral immune benefits, kind of like when people read the Playboy for the articles. I only do it for
it's strange that so the idea is early in understanding evolutionary history and learning more about genes, the problem to be solved was, well, why if cloning is possible, and if so many of these things do still clone themselves today, and almost all of life for the first billion years of cloning, why in the world would you give up that passing 100% of your genes on? That, like, why would you trade and only pass 50% of your genes on? And there's a few good explanations. One is just that the diversity, what you mentioned earlier about like, oh, if you just mix it up, that creates more diversity, which then kind of creates, puts a lot less eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
And then time and various environmental and evolutionary pressures are then able to kind of weed out a lot more, and some of the ones that survive in environment are kind of, I don't know, potentially more robust. But so the really fun idea, and a lot of people think there's a lot of merit to this, is that whatever large organisms first stumbled upon this weird sexual reproduction stuff that didn't happen for the first billion years or so of life.
The first fuckers.
The
kinkiest organisms in history.
So weird. And they then, with swapping their DNA, it was, if you think about this kind of the common example is to think about this as a lock and key mechanism where your immune system is providing all these locks that you're born with, and then bacteria is trying to pick those locks with their rapid evolution. And what sexual reproduction and swapping 50% of your genes out is doing is it's changing the locks on that bacteria. And that provided enough of an advantage to outwit enough bacteria and viruses to add to inclusive fitness, the ability to survive, create offspring, for that offspring to have advantages, and so on. And so probably not probably, but yeah, I would
possibly.
say
I always sub out possibly if I think probably is too strong. I go possibly.
There's a strong possibility that at least one of the bigger benefits of sexual reproduction evolutionarily was this outwitting of viruses and such and parasites in the first place. And
it came full circle now, kind of. It's interesting how now we associate sex with STDs.
Yeah. You cannot get away from these things.
They red queened us.
Exactly. And in the Red Queen episode too, I almost finished a thought. I had this open loop pop into my head actually before starting this episode about antibacterial resistance, where we are almost there. You kill enough of the bacteria, but some of it still exists, and then you stop your antibacterial treatment or whatever because you feel better. You're like, got it. Now now the ones that still exist and proliferate are the ones that are resistant to antibiotics.
A-team, yeah.
The A-team. And that's the same with, that was the taming, I want to bring it up because that was the taming the tumor thing, which I never finished explaining, which is there's aspects of cancer that are potentially keeping lots of aspects of the tumor in check itself. So there's like, even within cancer, there's cancer renegades from the cancer. Like, cancer is such a selfish motherfucker. And that's probably why cancer spreads too, is because sometimes, we're acting on tumors or a tumor is large enough and aspects of it are powerful enough to kill other parts of cancer. And so
is it like the Sith? Like, I haven't brought up Star Wars in a while, but you know, the rule of two, where there's only two Siths, there's a master and an apprentice. And the reason that they kept it to two is if you have too many Sith bad guys, they just kill each other. So you can't have like too many bad guys running around. It's like, okay, there's just going to be one main bad guy and then one to teach. And then eventually that one you teach will kill you.
Yeah.
But yeah, the renegade cancer is like, hey, we're trying to cancer over here. No, you're not. I'm going to cancer your cancer. And then
exactly. It is. There's cancer that like gets cancer back. It's like very, it's like cancer. It's like karma cancer or something. A
school
like that.
shooter.
Yeah. Exactly. It's the Dexter of cancer. And so the idea is if like radiation, if you don't get the entire tumor, well, guess what? Now you've just selected for cancer that is resistant to radiation and chemotherapies and such. And now that's going to proliferate even more. So it's a really delicate thing where maybe speculation is that maybe it's in your interest to just like keep it managed, like keep that boss cancer tumor like in charge but under control.
Make it think it's in charge.
Yeah, make it think it's in charge.
Doesn't radiation therapy kind of feel like leeches of today? I bet in 1,000 years it'll
perfect.
Yeah, it just feels like such a leech.
In antibiotics, which is very different than what vaccines are doing, by the way, but antibiotics are also, I mean, this is a like potentially horrifying situation in term looking at it through the lens of this Red Queen, is that we're actually artificially selecting for, worse and worse bacteria without intentionally doing it. I will say for the many flaws of of our modern like mass farming industry, which is still quite new, they often have world-class biosecurity stuff that's like unlike anything old McDonald's farm ever had. And and they'll call a herd on a moment's notice if it means like a virus is
mad cow is serious,
gotten around. They don't mess around. And I'm sure that there's cost benefit analysis, and there's it's probably like, oh well, how bad is that really going to be? There's that's another with a lot of these things, something like a virologist to your average person could quite reasonably come across like a very nervous Nelly or look very wrong in hindsight. And that's because if there's something that like there's only like a 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000 chance of it actually happening, but if it happens, maybe 50 million people die. Like you pay attention to that, and then if
you were going to get LASIK surgery and there was a 1% chance that you died, you probably wouldn't get the surgery, even if it's 1%.
Yeah, you wouldn't. And then, but you could be, like just someone that knows nothing about the LASIK surgery or whatever else, or a politician or whatever else, be like, oh, don't even worry about it. And you're going to end up being right 99 out of that 100 or 999 times out of 1,000 times. Just because that's the odds, but so you can completely obliviously dismiss something and still end up being right like so many times. Not to jump too ahead here, but I'm thinking of SARS and bird flu, and I'm wondering if were those dealt with well, or did we just get lucky that those didn't cause a global pandemic, or was that like why was SARS and bird flu? How come that just fizzled out? And then when COVID was coming up, it was, most of us were thinking, no, this is just going to be like SARS. We won't hear about it come February. It's just the news. They need something to talk about. And then when South by Southwest shuts down, you're like, oh, this is a real pandemic now. Okay. This is
Boy Who Cried Wolf. This time the wolf actually came over.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't know enough about SARS and bird flu other than to say that I don't think we're in the clear with any of those. I think that they're going to keep on popping up, and it's just one of those things where you, like with Ebola, for example, people were incredibly vigilant with it, and there's just lots of ways of looking at it. Ebola is, no one wants to get Ebola. If you get Ebola, like you're kind of lucky to survive. It kills an insane number of people, depending on where you are.
Disease.
Yeah. But it's kind of like a horrifying death too, but it doesn't, it's transmitted through blood and such. And so like the actual chance of spreading Ebola, like I remember having a
blood sacrifice.
I remember having a blood sacrifice, and at that blood sacrifice, I had a AIDS and Ebola researcher. This woman, I'm struggling to remember her name, but it was in the summer 2020, and she studied AIDS through much of her career, and she was African American, and only took a break from that to go to Africa to study Ebola, and hands-on it was like meaningful and important to her. And one thing that hit home, she was like, oh, I'm so much more scared about COVID than I've ever been. Like, I touch and deal with people with AIDS and Ebola and stuff all of the time, but it's, you know, you wear gloves and
because it's blood versus respiratory.
Yeah. You don't have I don't have unprotected sex, and like, I don't need to really worry about, you can get jabbed with a needle or something like that, you know, running an experiment, which has happened. There's been like lab leaks and stuff from some whoopsie daisies like that along the way. Ebola actually being one of them, but that's you, like, unless you somehow got someone else's blood on you in an open wound or something like that, the chance you're actually going to get Ebola is really rare. But they don't always know that at the start of something. And just because it's rare, if it's incredibly deadly, you know, like COVID, not near as virulent as something like AIDS or Ebola or whatever, just spreads through the air, which is the horrifying thing, is its ability, how contagious it is.
And it's new and unpredictable.
Yeah, but Ebola was, and it's been around for a while, but that was, and again, we're jumping ahead, but we'll go back in time a little bit. But that was, so zoonosis is now the kind of leading cause of a lot of these, and has been for a long time. Is there will be this red queen effect within a species. Often bats, primates, rats are the big ones.
No pigs? Or am I just remembering contagion?
Oh, yeah, no, there's like swine flu, pigs as well, and mosquitoes are big vectors. I
was afraid of mosquito AIDS for a while. I always thought, like, why can't mosquito give you AIDS? How come that's not heard of more? Feels like you should.
It's a good question. I don't know why mosquitoes can't give you AIDS.
They probably can. It's just very rare that, like, you're standing camping and then someone has AIDS over in the next tent and then the mosquito comes straight to you. And
yeah, I mean, the virus still has to, even though they're just vectors rather than I'm forgetting the like intermittent species or whatever, I think is what they would call something like a
incubators.
Yeah. So, but there's still a lot of times with, say, malaria has to go through stages of life within a mosquito. So it just goes from someone's blood into like this 4-stage process that I couldn't possibly articulate for you right now. In mosquitoes to
denial, grief, acceptance, denial, anger, grief, acceptance. There we go.
And then gets into the mosquito's saliva eventually. After grief and acceptance, it gets into the mosquito's saliva. So then it's not, I actually thought that a vector was like, oh, the mosquito sucks blood out of you and then goes to suck it out of another person and like accidentally regurgitates some of that blood from that other person into your blood. And I guess that's not what's happening. The virus or bacteria, in the case of malaria, it's going through stages and getting into the mosquito's saliva, which then passes on to you.
It's always a little different than what you think. Like with a straw, you think it's because you suck it up and it's like your sucking motion that makes the liquid go up. But really, it's you're creating a vacuum, and then the vacuum is what's doing it. It's always something else.
Yeah, it's been. I mean, it's been, learning about this stuff has been often really overwhelming. It's definitely given me an appreciation for the people that are dedicated enough and have the patience to sit and read and learn all of these. You take like a 101 infectious disease course, which is like, you know, to an infectious disease researcher, that's like kindergarten level stuff from where they're at, like 30 years into their career. And you take an infectious disease course and it's like, whew, this is difficult. This is a challenging thing to learn.
Yeah.
It's so complicated.
It's more advanced than any computer program because it's, I mean, I don't really know that because there are some advanced computer programs, but it just seems like since it's biology, it's not this linear box thinking of this, therefore that. It's like all these million different variables interacting with each other
and figuring
mutating,
out why the fuck it happens. Sometimes there's like in the case of the Hydra, it was bats. However, somehow bats once in a while would infect horses, and then those horses, or like whatever dung or whatever, they would eat it, and then those horses would once in a great while, they would die a horrible death usually, but once in a great while, in the meantime, they would pass it to like whatever stable hand or the horse owner or the vet, and it's not a thing that you'd want to have. Very few people would get it, but it's interesting because humans couldn't get it directly from a bat. They couldn't get the same thing from the bat, but the bat can give it to the horse. The horse then amplifies it, and then it gets past this threshold that then can give it to humans. And so there's lots of interactions like that. And I think Ebola was sort of like that in a way, where they kind of, at the end of the day, got down to bats giving it to primates, and then humans getting it for bushmeat. Like some of the first cases of it were fucking brutal, and it's like, it seems like such a dumb idea in hindsight, but you're not a desperate hunter-gatherer looking out for bushmeat. But what is happen,
bushmeat?
Bushmeat's just like, well, it's...
I'm not going to make a sex joke on that. I mean, it's so easy. But I
didn't even think of the sex joke. Wow, I'm so proud of myself for not thinking of the sex joke. Look at me, not even noticing that bushmeat could be a sex joke. I don't know if there's something wrong with me, or if I've grown as a human that I didn't make the bushmeat sex
You've grown,
joke.
and that's what's wrong with you.
But it's just like wild game. It's actually kind of like, it's almost a derogatory term, although they use it as well. The people that eat it, it's...
What's derogatory about it? Because like the people that live in the bushes or something?
Like in America, like you go pheasant hunting or something, and you're like, oh, we ate wild game. Look at us with this wild game. And then you hear about, like, do you hear Africans eating this bush meat? They're like eating chimpanzees and stuff, when really it's like the opposite. You're hunting things for funsies. They're just people trying to survive.
What qualifies as bush meat, though?
Basically, I think just anything that's within like the jungle, that like hunter gatherers are going into the jungle to get. So I think it's a lot of just larger like boars and stuff, and
bushmeat,
and chimps and that sort of thing, I believe. In fact, what's the one that I just heard about? Patagonia. And now I just want to say Patagonia, but it's not. I had a researcher on recently, and I asked him the best bushmeat he ever had, and it was something that's now an endangered species. And it's like this cute animal, and now it's just, I want to eat it so bad, even though it's like I wouldn't, but there was something about it.
Then how do you know that was really the best bushmeat that researcher ever had? It could have just been they were having a good day. They had just the right amount of white wine with it. It was, you never know what other factors. Someone was saying the story of some caviar they had, and they thought I think it was Tom Rhodes, and then they just remembered it as being so good. And then turns out they tried the same caviar a year later, and then they made the connection that it was, oh no, I was just having a great time overseas,
you're on
and I had
date.
a great set. Yeah. and setting versus the actual can of fish eggs.
Oh, absolutely. I'll tell you what, if you want to have the caviar experience and you don't want to pay for it, just take like a Ziploc bag and just gather some random ocean water and then just eat that bag. There, you've had the caviar experience. I had caviar in San Diego with Cole Marta and
hell yeah, shout out Cole Marta
Peluso, because we did it just for a joke, and I'd never had it before, and spent a ridiculous amount of money on.
Joke's on you.
The joke was on me. It was like, caviar, we should do this. People talk about this caviar stuff. What the heck? We're having a good time. Bought it. We had it. And like the waiter came by and he was like, it was like the waiter was disappointed in us for ordering it. It was, because he came back and he's like we ordered it and he's like, okay. And then we ate it and he was like, how's the caviar? We're like, yeah. He's like, tastes like the ocean. We're like, yeah. He's like,
I make $2.75 an hour here. I don't know how that's legal. Fuck you. You better be tipping extra good on this $100 or $200. And a caviar used to be poor people food. Same with lobster, I think. And
lobster
then
was for sure.
Somehow
I don't know about
flipped.
caviar.
Yeah, it flipped. I don't know how the flip happened, but
lobster was just scarcity. But
weird.
Yeah.
One time, this isn't that related, but it does have to do with a waiter coming by the table. One time we ordered fries and it was way too many fries. And as soon as the fries came down to the table, we go, this is a lot of fries. And the waiter's walking away and he just goes, just let it happen. Which there's something so sinister in that line, but it was also so playful and fun. Let it happen.
That's a great line. That's fantastic.
Same restaurant. I don't know what it is about the witty waiters there, but another waiter or waitress. I don't know if you say waitress anymore because, you don't say actress anymore. You just say actor for everyone. Or maybe
really?
That was just a 90s thing. Sometimes these things don't take off. Sometimes they're like in the 90s, it's like, don't say black, say African American. Don't say comedian, say comedian. And then it's just like a little 90s fad. Now, if you called someone a comedian, people are like,
I prefer black by a long shot.
Please. Yeah, I'm not American either. I live in Canada. Yeah. I live in England. Like, what the fuck is this? Or the comedian, like when some comedy show or open mic hosts are like, our next performer is a comedian who she happens to be very funny with the IE, like that annoying bullshit. But anyway, the server, I think Catherine ordered duck confit hash, and then she just came by later and goes, duck confit hash. And then you're like, what, you're out? just repeats the thing you ordered and just shakes her head.
That's funny.
The fries one was better. The fries was a better story.
Duck confit hash is overrated in my opinion. Duck's an overrated meat if you ask me. But I take strong stances. I'm very opinionated. It causes a lot of trouble. People are going to come after me about my duck stance, and I'm okay with that. I gotta speak my truth.
Yeah. I'm glad that you chose that hill to die on.
So with Ebola, there were hunters that came across an already dead chimp. We're like, well, this just made our day easy. And then brought that dead chimp that died of Ebola, which was a thing they didn't know about. And then, fed it to everyone, and a bunch of people died from it, and then passed it to other people. And that's happened several times with Ebola. And it very rarely makes it into a city. And then once in a while it does. And our modern world is such that, so one of the big reasons why these things are going to keep on happening faster is global travel is a huge one. This never happened before with global travel. Even, I mean, if you think about the Spanish flu, which they didn't have the same medical care we do, but that was about 50 million people, I think they say died, and there was a lot
1918 or what?
Yeah, we'll get into that one, but for
it's
now,
it's 100th anniversary. We're doing a 100th anniversary celebration of the Spanish flu with this pandemic.
But that was, if you think about how devastating 50 million people dying, and not to mention whatever other, I don't know how many, if there were long-term impacts and stuff with the flu for people that survived, but regardless, that was long before like industrial farming and regular global travel and like people just regularly flying halfway around the earth and introducing new things and shipping containers coming from wherever that are possibly spreading things. So
there wasn't commercial flights, right? I don't think so. Not in 1918. For sure not in 1918.
No.
There was like World War, because World War I, there was planes.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
that's
the point being is,
1920s.
think of how much worse it would have been had there been global travel and stuff at the time.
It would have been curtains.
But there's so with something like Ebola, this bushmeat situation, as you're say, cutting as human impact is creating smaller and smaller forests and containing them in smaller regions, then say a fruit tree that a fruit bat is eating a piece of fruit from, and then a gorilla or something comes by and eats that same piece of fruit and gets the Ebola that doesn't negatively impact the bat, because the bats group together and like heat their bodies, kind of like in the way that fevers kill some of our diseases. They sometimes heat their bodies up and it sometimes kills diseases that way. Not all of them, but so as forests get smaller, now your chance of a gorilla or a chimp snacking on the same piece of fruit that a bat had snacked on dramatically increases. Now your opportunity for a hunter-gatherer to come across that chimp or that gorilla that happened to eat that same piece of fruit that happened to eat, that those odds just become increasingly more likely as biodiversity decreases. So that's one of the big issues that's been happening in our modern world. And then what was interesting with some of the early cases of Ebola, and we talked about this is going to be reminiscent of talking about the Black Plague, which led to a lot of the witch trials early on.
Halloween episode.
Is
Black Plague and bubonic the same or different?
Good question.
They sound similar.
I didn't go back further than smallpox, and so I'm really foggy on all of the differences of those. It's some of the early ones that like devastated. Like again, before this global travel, there'd be diseases that would wipe out like 3/4 or half of like a population, or sometimes like 90% of. I think something like 90% of Native Americans were wiped out by disease. Aztecs were. This is all stuff that's before my knowledge base. But
because of colonial intervention or without?
But then Aztecs were also like really vulnerable to colonialism because they were, they had been, I forget what their disease was. It was at this bad timing. They had just had this diseases devastating their population at the same time colonialists showed up and they were weak and vulnerable. And that's happened, but that's happened not just to like...
You had to just laugh if that was like your reality at the time. Like the plague is devastating you, and then these crazy foreigners with like guns and stuff are just coming from the ocean. Like, oh, you gotta be kidding me.
Guess we didn't sacrifice enough people or something.
But I sacrificed my whole family. What? I sacrificed them.
And those are the stories that we came up with before modern science. And that's what happened with witchcraft, where these like medicine healers at the time, like we talked about during the Halloween episode, were then blamed for when things, you know, when they were unable to help someone recover, they were blamed for cursing them. And this outcome bias that happens so much that we need to be wary of, and the importance of double-blind studies. But that happened with Ebola too. That's like, it seems like weird and foreign and old, and oh, no one has ideas like that anymore. But the same thing happened early Ebola. Like there was one family where like someone died and some of their family died, and the story that they came up with was, oh, well, one of their doctors, or sorry, that guy's brother had gotten an education and went out somewhere to become a doctor or a lawyer or something and had success, and he hadn't been generous enough. Like they were jealous of this guy that got out and was successful. They're like, and he hadn't been generous enough, and that's why the gods have punished their family for this guy's lack of generosity with his.
But they didn't punish the guy.
So then, when more people died, they're like, "We gotta get this son of a bitch." So they burnt down his house and nearly killed him. Can you imagine that? You've like got out, you've educated yourself, you're like trying to do good in life. I think he did become a doctor, and then your family dies and you got to deal with that. And then just a mob comes after you and burns down your house and tries to kill you.
No, we hate the success of others. We just can't stand it at a primal atomic level.
Yeah, and it's fun to see, it's easier to see when other people are doing it, and not like, when your neighbor's peddling a conspiracy, it's like easier to buy into. But when some other culture has this conspiracy or some witchcraft thing, you're like, well, that's silly. How could you believe such a thing? But once it's funny to see the way these things have emerged, because science eventually wins, and like knowledge and understanding turns out to be like really powerful and useful. And so then the belief systems then have to change. So as more people got Ebola, then kind of the various witch doctors or whatever in the city that first would blame this guy or whatever else, a lot of victim blaming kind of stuff, is what happened then was, then like whatever shaman or whatever be like, oh, you know what? Actually, it's not a curse, and we know it's not a curse because now a bunch of us are getting it, and curses are specific to individuals that deserved it. And also, like once scientists were able to demonstrate that it came from eating bush meat and chimps, they're like, oh yeah, curses don't work on chimps, so we know it's not from curses. So sorry about that guy whose house we burned down. I guess it was something else.
We'll never do it again, but our kids will do it, and their kids and their kids and so on. And we're just replaying the same play over here with different actors.
So what I was talking early on about, what I love about learning about this stuff is it exposes so many of our cognitive biases. I say our because it's easy to look at others and be like, can you believe what other people, the mistakes and thinking that other people are making, and not see it in ourselves. But there's a general theme that I've noticed throughout the history of pandemics as far as my interpretation of events, which we'll get into more of, and just seeing in real time what happens in terms of people's perception of this, which is our consciousness. Definitely one, egocentrism, oldest bias in the book. We're all like default the center of the universe. And if you specifically aren't the center of the universe, then at least you and your family and humanity is, or whatever. It's just very hard to escape from. And then the idea is that chaos, basically bad. There's a lot of like wish thinking. There's a lot of what I think we'll talk so much about on the show, and it'll come up again and again, is lack of predictability and lack of control being the two biggest stressors in a human's life. And one of the ways to manage that anxiety is to believe that you can simply control and predict much more than you can actually control and predict. And if you just do the right things and you follow the right thing and you do this exercise and practice and all these things, especially in terms of like taking care of your health and exercising and eating right, are really valuable. But there's also consciousness will dupe us into thinking just that is enough. Which it's, when a tree gets a virus, it's not because it didn't like do enough karate classes or, or whatever. It's
if I had just taken one more karate class instead of investing those years and years of kung fu, judo, and Muay Thai, if I had only known karate was the answer right under my nose.
Yeah, but the tree that gets like 1,000 cankers from someone bringing in firewood from 100 miles away, it's not because the tree ate too much McDonald's or whatever. But there's the idea of this kind of just world hypothesis, which is this kind of illusion that we live in this fair, just world, and all you have to do is do everything right. And you will get the good things that are coming to you. And then the fundamental attribution error, which is that when bad things happen to you, well, that's just dumb luck, some misfortune. When bad things happen to another person, they must have done something to deserve it. When a good thing happens to you, you earned it. You must have done something right. When a good thing happens to something else, they just got lucky, those sons of bitches.
Yeah, Huntsberger had an old joke about that with karma. It's always positive. If something bad happens to you, then it's good karma, and it's never... I don't even remember the joke, but basically, it only goes one way. Like, if something bad happens, it's good. You're building up good karma for later.
I mean, life is it's... Especially to be an anxious primate that is becoming more and more aware of just how many unknowns and of unknowns there are in the world.
And we're on a conveyor belt of linear time with no control of slowing it down other than with our own perception through meditation or psychedelics. But you're not really slowing down that clock.
Mm-mm.
The clock is still just, no matter what, going even if the clock appears to be floating, or you close your eyes, or you forget about the clock, it's just pushing you forward on this conveyor belt.
Yeah.
We're lucky we have control even over 3-dimensional space. That's where I'm going to exercise some gratitude, where I can move around in 3-dimensional space. That's kind of cool. But 4-dimensional space, only get to go forward, only get to go at the rate of 1 second per second.
Yeah. And it's also, it's it's worth remembering that there are things that we can improve upon and get better at predicting and have more control over, and not, which is the common mistake that I make, to fall into the idea of just everything is just pointless and it's utterly helpless and there's nothing you can do about it, and the world's just full of unpredictable horrors and awful shit that's going to happen. Like that's true. That's just as it's true in a way, but it's also, you know, it's on a spectrum, and you can err on to one side or the other, and both can be very delusional.
Yeah, what did you call it? What was that bias you just listed? The one where you think that
fundamental attribution error.
Yeah, fundamental attribution error. FAE. Because the error of following that too much is then like, oh, well, why even work for anything? Because if I work hard, I still won't get it. And that's not true. I think you can work hard and get lucky and improve your lot in life. But also, absolutely, you might do everything right and still not be a millionaire. Oh, yeah. And you might do everything wrong and become a millionaire. A lot of people do. So, luck is... someone said it with comedy or with show business, where when you do show business, everything is a lottery ticket. But if you have lots of talent, it's like having a few more lottery tickets. But it's still a lottery at the end of the day. Your talent will not save you or push you to the top.
And a common theme on this show is probably, too, that we're going to bring up often, is the utility of drive, sometimes accuracy is a very different thing than motivation. And sometimes what motivates us isn't accurate in terms of what is actual reality. And sometimes what is accurate and actual reality isn't terribly motivating. Those are two very different things. Sometimes there's plenty of overlap. But these sometimes like really useful drives that keep you going, that keep you getting out of bed, that keep you believing in yourself, no matter if they're like necessarily in line with reality, or if your socks are actually lucky that you're wearing. Fuck, if it keeps you going, a lot of times there's so much utility in that. Yeah. And because of that, that's an aspect of our identity that I think that we want to defend quite a bit, and things that, when kind of reality in the universe doesn't kind of cooperate with that narrative, that leads to some cognitive dissonance, which leads to then consciousness creating exaggerating stories to explain why the external environment doesn't seem to be cooperating with your idea of how reality should work. It's not fair that my family should die of Ebola. So you construct, this
Marvel universe of different characters and forces.
Exactly. And it's fascinating. It's so fascinating. And I'd be shocked if we eventually were able to, really map the mind and give MRIs, and you could put like a little MRI skull cap on a bird. I'd be shocked if that bird wasn't telling itself very dramatic.
I'd be happy to just put caps on birds. Let's just start with the cap. And then when you're done with the MRI machine, throw it on the cap. But let's just get designing the perfect cap, get the bill just right. Maybe like a flat bill, like slightly slanted for the more hip birds.
Yeah. Well, we all have different varying priorities for sure. But putting little caps on birds, that'd be a fun hobby. If you had a bird feeder and started doing that, I would love to, because then you get to just imagine what's going through your neighbors' minds and stuff when that bird lands on their property and it's wearing an awesome fucking like sports cap with a dope ass bill on
Yankees
it.
New York thing on it. The Philadelphia Phillies hat. You're like, is that a MAGA hat? Like, no, it's just a Philadelphia Phillies hat. That's been a red hat longer than a MAGA hat was a MAGA hat. It's funny how all red hats in history now you're like, what? Oh, it's just a red hat. Bart Simpson just had a red hat on.
Just happened to me the other day. I saw a billboard and there's a guy wearing a big red hat. And I was like, oh, that's a strong stance to put a MAGA hat on for your cabinetry business. And then I got closer and it was not at all a MAGA hat, but that's the assumption. It's kind of good because you're getting two different audiences there. You're drawing the eye no matter what. Like if you're MAGA, you're gonna see that and be like, all right, and then you read the thing like, oh, okay, well, I still need cabinetry. And then if you hate MAGA, you're like, oh, what is this? Oh, okay, I was too hard. You know what? I should give that guy some business.
Yeah. Someone said that the problem with that slogan is the second A. Like if it was just "Make America Great," it's all good, but it's the again part that's the troubling insinuation.
Yeah, I've always taken issue with the idea of the sacredness of people. There was something about 5 generations ago, 20 generations ago, where people were geniuses in magic, and we've like devolved from that time. So like, you know, whatever Socrates said was where the Bible was perfect and our founding fathers knew everything. And it's just like, I don't know. I think they were all just humans. Yeah. Pretty sure the whole time it was humans.
The Coca-Cola bottles were cooler. And it was cool that they actually put cocaine in it. Maybe that would be fun.
I will not argue with it was cool that they actually put cocaine in it. And people were like totally okay.
Yeah, Dr. Pepper had heroin in it. Just everything was just sure. It's in a bottle. It's got a picture of a doctor on it. All good.
I mean, yeah, that's.
But we do that. Isn't it funny? We do that ourselves, where it's like, yeah, high school, that was the good old days. But if you really think about it, you're like, no, that actually sucked. I'm just remembering aspects of it that I miss.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not even like talking. I'm not even saying like, oh, poor founding fathers, they're a bunch of idiots that didn't know anything. They may have been, but we just tend to like even take something
by today's
like,
standards. Yeah, they don't measure up, but maybe by then standards, they were good people.
But even as modern as like, you know, anytime someone dies or whatever, or like Terrence McKenna, for example, like, oh, well, Terrence McKenna said this and Terrence McKenna said that. Like, yep, that's true. Those were good, entertaining quotes, and also probably wouldn't think of that as like dogma. Think of it as an enjoying thing, an enjoyable thing to listen to and perhaps be inspired by and investigate. But dogma, a perfect truth? Nah. No,
and
no one's got that.
One of the most important things McKenna said about the truth was like how, well, the truth doesn't ask you to avert your gaze or listen to it closely. The truth just is. And if you can explain the truth in a way in which it can be understood, it will be believed because the real truth is incorruptible. And
in terms of objective reality, that's absolutely right. And that's like, there are, I think that was the important distinction that Noah Yuval Harari was able to articulate very well, that to the general public in a way that I think the general public wasn't used to thinking about things in that way, but separating objective and subjective reality, which is like, it doesn't matter if you or I exist. It doesn't matter if humans exist at all. It doesn't matter if there's no life on this planet. There is still an objective reality. There's still, you know, Jupiter or whatever still exists, whether humans are around to name it or make subjective judgments about how to classify it, or whether Jupiter is good or bad or beautiful or whatever subjective opinions might be.
I say it probably is, but also like everyone who's ever talked about Jupiter is a human. And everyone who's ever noticed it is a human. So we could have just collective hallucination of everything.
It's possible. I tend to believe that Earth was
maybe
truly
start with
here.
a rock on Earth or something, but Jupiter, that's like.
I think that if next week there was a super virus that absolutely decimated every single human on Earth and maybe even all life on Earth, this curtain behind me is still a curtain that objectively exists. And
unless the disease makes you vomit like acidic bile and you happen to turn behind you and it hit the curtain, then maybe not. But other than that, I'll give you the curtain. It'll probably still hang out. I just love the idea of reality existing before there's observers for it. Like, what are you doing, reality? Like you're performing a play and nobody's there. But maybe you're rehearsing. You're rehearsing the play before the audience is there. But it's just so funny for there to be material reality and no one's observing it. It's just kind of realitying.
Yeah, I mean, it's this assumption that there was any intent in material reality to start with, which is debatable. Which if there wasn't and it just is, and the Big Bang just was and is, and it's still just happening, then our judgments of it doesn't change it certainly doesn't change the way the Earth revolves around the sun to believe that the Earth is flat, or to believe that the sun revolves around the Earth. That never, when humans learned that the Earth revolved around the sun, it didn't actually change Earth's orbit. The Earth had always revolved around the sun. Mm-hmm. We just detected that compared to our intuitive interpretation. And subjective and objective reality is a really important, plays a really important role in our interpretations of these pandemics, because there's things like public policy that have happened in every pandemic in terms of what should be legislated, what should, what actually is, like what's right, what law is right, what freedoms do people have.
Yeah, you weren't allowed to spit on someone to initiate a duel anymore. You had to just slap them with a sanitized glove. And people were like, this is ridiculous. You can't spit on someone to start a duel anymore. What world do we want to live in?
And that's their subjective, opinion, and everyone's entitled to their opinions, but it doesn't change the objective reality of the, potential chance of getting a virus from being slapped by your tuberculosis glove or whatever. That's an objective reality. And if you get it, what that virus will do to your immune system and everything else, that's falls a lot more into the objective reality. But subjective experience is such a more important thing to humans' life that we overvalue our subjective realities, and those are the things that we're usually bickering about.
Yeah, it's the whole thing. The subjective experience is the only true experience, although we like to, some stuff is like, it's probably objective. It's passed all my tests to being objective, but really, like when it boils down, you only have your subjective experience of everything. And you shouldn't live like that, because you'll just go insane if you're like, well, this could all just be a simulation and it's a test and everything. But we never actually have a true objective experience of anything.
And it's, just objective reality doesn't, necessarily matter always. I mean, to understand the objective reality of what goes into, to walk outside and to walk 10 feet, you couldn't possibly understand all of the objective reality. You couldn't possibly understand all of the information, every fact about every plant, every bit of soil, every bit of, rock that it's on top of, every type of organism and plant life that's been through there's an impossible amount of information and objective reality that you could investigate, and at the end of the day most people are going to be like, I just want to like look at a pretty flower. Like, why the fuck would I care about any of that stuff? Like, I just want to smell a flower and feel nice. That's much more important to most of our lives than objective realities, and so that's been a lot of the push and pull through a lot of the pandemic histories. So one of my favorite ones, so I think we've maybe covered in the past talking about smallpox and I think Lady Montague, but I actually had some, because I was like, how did she discover this in the first place? But I guess what happened, so she was this rich, she was the daughter of a duke, and I guess she was like this beautiful, wealthy woman, and had just an incredible life. And then she got smallpox, and smallpox is fucking awful. You're lucky to survive it back then. Certainly, I think it killed like 25% of people that it infected. And
cute name for a deadly disease.
Oh, look at his tiny pox.
Tiny
it's a
little
petite pox.
And then meanwhile, gout sounds terrible. There's like I think Nate Bargatze has a joke about gout just sounds like something that you might want to be sitting down for this. It's gout. Yeah. You sure?
I don't even know what gout is.
I think it's very curable and not that serious, I think.
Well, if you survive smallpox, you have these blisters and everything go all over your body. And so you have, so if you're lucky enough to survive, you now have like scars and stuff. So this beautiful woman that had everything that, her life had just always gone her way, got smallpox, nearly died from it, then had like, I don't know how horrible the scarring was, but from her perspective, it was, diminished
subjectively
her attractiveness.
Awful.
Yeah. And then her husband was doing some sort of like missionary work in, I think, Istanbul, I think. Is that where?
Where the markets are.
Shit, don't quote me on that, but wherever it was, or Constantinople? Yeah.
Not gonna lie to you, when I imagine a city and you name both those names, same city.
Yeah. I don't
know
geography.
Same cartoony board game.
Nor do I have the retention
city
for details, but I'll give you the concepts and the stories I can remember pretty well. Basically, she goes to, what was considered by these Europeans to be these like primitive cultures, and she must have noticed that they like, oh, no one here, the smallpox was ravaging the world that they knew. No one here, or very few people, seem to have these pox scars, which was like evidence of this is how long this stuff has been going on. This is how many people have been, every other person you'd run into would have scars from these crazy pox blisters. And so she wondered what was up with that, and then found that the kind of medicine workers or whatever, or plant healers or shamans or whatever you would call them, each September they would find an infected person, and they would take pus out of their blisters, store it in an avocado, and then take like a fucking needle or whatever, or a knife, and open someone's vein and put that pus in there.
What's the avocado for?
Pus, just to store it, I guess, or I don't know if they thought
I picked a watermelon, but yeah, avocado works.
I mean, it's kind of like a little dish,
Yeah.
You take the seed out, you cut it in half. It's a little easier to carry than, say, a watermelon.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Avocado will stay.
I'm not saying there's not better solutions, but I would like to maybe make an effort to talk you out of the watermelon.
Just seems more storage, thicker skin, maybe not
just
as readily
a watermelon
available.
Full of pus.
Yeah.
Dig in, everybody. We have the pus melon here. And she noticed this, and then I think her husband was getting called to serve somewhere or go to like London or something like that was currently being absolutely ravaged by smallpox, and she had children that hadn't gotten smallpox yet, was concerned about them, knew what she had gone through, and took the leap and did this procedure with her children. This like really insane looking. That's the other thing with all of these things. I think another thing to think about is the world that we evolved in over millions of years. We haven't been humans for millions of years, but ancestors before that had the same selective pressures acting on them. And everything has kind of some of these general mechanisms of disease avoidance. Is various ancestors that had an inclination to, say, avoid diarrhea, like you mentioned earlier. There were probably a couple people that decide they'd see diarrhea and be like, it's just something about it I like. I don't know. I like to play with it. And those people didn't survive and reproduce.
Oh, thank goodness.
The same levels. Whereas if you're like a dung beetle or something like that, or a plant that benefits from the fertilizer, then you get selected for having like a propensity toward finding these what is to us disgusting things. And so there is no, like, speaking of objective reality, there is no like objective good or bad. It's just that our subjective morality and disease avoidance evolved kind of based on guessing at what ended up working out the best through the objective, more objective lens of evolution. You know what I'm trying to say there? It's like basically people that avoided someone that was sneezing, there's nothing good or bad about avoiding a sneeze or running toward a sneeze. It's just people that were off put by sneezes just happened to, without knowing it, just happened to avoid more diseases. And so then these that's how these disease avoidance psychological tools were built after a long period of time, and they aren't perfect. So the reason why you're scared of spiders was because primate ancestors along the way that had a fear of spiders probably had some genetic advantage to certainly, like, because spiders may be something that you could eat, but maybe the nutritional value, the trade-off of actually getting bit or whatever else was such that those things that had a preference to evade and be fearful of spiders tended to survive and reproduce more. So now in a modern day, when if you see a daddy long legs in your house, there's no objective reason to be, there is no harm objectively that thing is going to give you, but there's still a feeling. You see this creepy crawly thing and you have this heuristic of, avoid this little creepy crawly thing.
Yeah, a war that is centuries and millennia old, and we're the descendants of the scaredy cats. It's funny to think that the bravest version of us is long gone. Like, we're all descendants of someone who's a little bit more squeamish than the average person. Like, there is no, well, there's going to be the outliers here and there that will just run into traffic screaming, but for the most part, we're like, no, avoid. And
the important thing to remember is that all of these things aren't perfect. They are guessing at models that are going to serve you or had served your ancestors in the past. They aren't necessarily adapted for the modern world. So when we say like, trust your intuition, that's a nice little platitude that, like, yeah, I'm going to trust my gut. But there was never so there's mismatches and then there's constraints. So there's constraints, which is there was never a way for our disease avoidance to pick up on viruses and avoid people that weren't showing any symptoms. So within this Red Queen thing, any virus or bacteria that then is able to like maybe elongate the amount of time, like say AIDS, for example, before it starts showing symptoms and expressing itself, buys a lot of opportunity to spread in the meantime. And we don't have a natural disease avoidance for that. Same with, there's a lot of things to look for in terms of what water you should and shouldn't drink if you're a hunter-gatherer, which is probably pretty much any fresh water is fine. And then something like cholera happens because we start putting in modern wells and then have a sewage system that's like near it that accidentally starts leaking into that well, and you drink water just like you always have this natural inclination to drink water, and you get cholera and die. I think the last bit of cholera killed like 1 in 3 people or something like that, or 1 in 3 homes had someone die of cholera in this area before Jon Snow figured out and traced it like mathematically to
look to your neighbor to the left, look to your neighbor to your right. It's you.
Yeah.
You're the 1 in 3.
And so because of our evolved disease avoidance doesn't always match our modern reality, and then like just world hypothesis, all these other cognitive biases, and it leads to this cognitive dissonance of, in the time of cholera, it was this common theme of, oh, well, diseases are something that poor people get. So we're not in the poor community, so we won't have to worry about it. And it just so happened the well that caused a lot of it was in a wealthy neighborhood that had access to they were able to afford their own wells and everything else. And lo and behold, people are like, why aren't poor people getting this disease? Why are rich people getting it? If poor people are the ones that are always sick, and which was also generally the case, being malnourished and everything else. And
I get wanting to be better than people, but you shouldn't want to be that much better than people. You shouldn't want to have to step over homeless people to get to your mansion. You want like maybe 100 more square feet than your neighbor. That's it.
Yeah, I want to be healthy and physically fit enough to hurdle over homeless people if it comes to that. But I don't want to, it doesn't make my day to step over a homeless person to pat myself on the back for having done this and that right in life. And that's why I deserve to be in my position, and they screwed up and did things wrong. And that's why they're getting hurdled over by me.
Mm-hmm.
But that's, so that's then back to the, lady meniscus. I always want to say Lady Montague.
It's not Montague?
It was Montague. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's like Romeo and Juliet, Montagues and Capulets.
Yeah, a Lady Montegreen is the term for mishearing a lyric in a song and thinking that it's a different thing.
I didn't even know there was a term for that.
What it is. Yeah. And
like, excuse me while I kiss this guy.
Yeah, exactly. The first person that coined it was, the lyric was Lady on the Green, and they were hearing Lady Montegreen and discovered it. And and so that got to be the dumb term that was then assigned to it. It's just whoever discovers the thing gets to name it, like sauce béarnaise syndrome. A lot of people got sick of things that they got food poisoning from a dish that they loved before and then couldn't touch the stuff afterwards. Guy who coined it just happened to be Bernays sauce. So that's why we call it sauce Bernays syndrome.
His last name was Sauce?
No. Bernays sauce is a like you put it on steaks and stuff.
Oh, his name's Bernays, and then he made a sauce. Gotcha.
No. Bernays is the name of the sauce. Like Bernays sauce is a fancy sauce that you put on steaks and such.
So there was a man and there is a sauce, but the man did not make the sauce?
Correct. The dude loved the sauce. It was his favorite sauce, and then he couldn't eat it anymore after he got sick from it.
He got it named after him because he ate it so much.
He got to name it because he had this condition happen to him.
Oh.
And the sauce, so it was named after the sauce that caused the condition in him.
Okay, so the sauce just had no name before, or it was just called good old boy steak sauce.
This is like that. Did you see that Fox News clip where the person's like, "You had syphilis" or whatever? There was a show called You, and Laura Ingraham was like, "What do you mean I didn't have measles?" Oh, that's what it was. Is measles? He's like, "No, you on You." He was trying to say the TV show.
Oh,
You.
it's like a Who's on First bit.
Yeah. We're having a little bit of Who's on. So there was so lots of people throughout humanity have had a favorite dish that then they ate it and it gave them food poisoning, or like you drink too much tequila and then you can no longer touch your favorite tequila ever again.
No, not my George Clooney tequila.
The person who like became mindful of that and decided to test it and coined the phrase, what inspired him was he loved steak with sauce Bernays on it. Sauce Bernays being the name of a fancy sauce that you put on steaks and things. It made him sick one day. He could no longer touch his favorite dish, which was this thing with sauce Bernays on it. And so he called it sauce Bernays syndrome.
Damn.
Like
you think
it
he
could
would
have
have
been called
avoided it?
soy sauce syndrome if it would have been soy sauce that did it to him, or tequila syndrome if it would have just taken a few more years and someone else would have coined it. Got what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
Sweet.
There's a nice little chunk there.
That was yeah, anyway, back to Lady Montague, who has who then takes this, her kids end up being inoculated, they're immune, and she was a bit of an anthropologist and tied in with the science community. Scientists started investigating it, but there's a few things. She learned this from primitives. That's a big no-no in this advanced European culture that is so much more knowledgeable and blah, blah, blah. What is there to learn from these primitive people? 2, she is a woman and women don't do science. And 3, it was fucking horrifying. Like, intuitively, you don't see a fucking blister on someone's face and dig in there and then cut yourself open and put that in your vein. That's not an intuitive thing to do unless you're, say, a hunter-gatherer that, like, in the way that you kind of approach averse things is by, like, small exposures to little bits of dangers in the environment is this thing that you've learned. And so
there was no hair of the dog as even a concept at the time in advanced society. Right.
And yeah, hair of the dog's a little more for like managing the withdrawal that comes along with hangovers too. But there was no such thing as like this early exposure, doing it intentionally. And so it's actually vaccines are actually an old, ancient, sacred plant, like organic, like medicine, like shamanic medicine.
Oh,
that was the origins of it.
The avocado pus was the original vax.
it was the original vax, and so it had all of the stigma to it. And then they started advancing the process, so it was less scary. Then this guy, so I came up with this idea. This guy noticed that that milkmaids, milkmaids.
Is that the milkman? But maids?
Yeah, I think a milkmaid's just like a lady that milks cows or delivers milk different. To your door.
Okay, yeah, milkman has a mailman suit and the bottles of milk, and then the maid maybe.
This is kind of before the modern milkman of like the 1940s or whatever. This was like this is the late 1700s, I believe. And there was so he noticed that people that handled milk a lot didn't get smallpox. Do you have an idea of why, how he would notice something like that in the first place?
Why he would notice it? I mean, honestly, I'm a pretty imaginative person. I can't imagine why you would notice this amongst various milkmaids, unless you love milkmaids and you're like getting your binoculars out and like being like, "Ooh, who's this new milkmaid? I got it. He's a creep."
That's my guess is that
creeps and avocados saving humanity.
My guess is that because there's, getting a bunch of pox scars on you, which most people had by that time, hindered your attractiveness. So he's just some dude checking out milkmaids, and then notices like, there's something about these milkmaids that just revs me up, which is the absence of pox scars. and then it makes this connection like, they never have these pox scars. What's going on with that? And then figured out that cows have something similar called cowpox, and was like, oh, I wonder if what if we instead exposed people to cowpox, which if you expose people to smallpox, they're actually probably going to get sick. Some of them are actually going to get smallpox because it's not a perfect
that's
science.
Overkill.
It's a bit of an overkill.
And then cowpox, don't get it, but you get the immune response that's just enough to fight off the next level.
Yeah. And then there was still tons of public denial and scary and counterintuitive, but, people like militaries would start mandating it and that sort of thing. But it took 70 years from the time Lady Montagu first inoculated her own children and brought this information. It took 70 years from the time that Europeans definitely had access to this information, could have tried this, until the time that it became widely and publicly adapted and every people. So within that 70 years, there was quite a bit of unnecessary death too, because it's change is slow and it takes time for people to change their mind and things to become ritual and people to get used to things. And so 70 years later, then the vaccines became abundant, and smallpox is like one of the few things that we've ever eradicated. Most things don't get eradicated. Most things stick around.
Yeah, unless they're animals.
Yeah.
Like we can get rid of animals pretty easily, but viruses, they're too small.
And man, now I have so much more to say about I want to talk about parrot fever and all this other stuff. I don't know. I feel like this has been a good episode.
What if we did bonus pandemic history, the sequel?
Ooh, should we do that? Put it out for the first one in January?
Yeah. And I feel like, not to toot our own horn here, because it could have been anyone doing it, but I feel like telling the history of vaccines and pandemics would have probably helped more than just the most recent doctor on, I don't know, the YouTube algorithm is just always pushing the same type of CDC COVID vaccine, what you need to know, blah, blah. And it kind of gets blurry. And I feel like it probably turns off a lot of people that we don't want to turn off. But if you see it from the lens of where this stuff comes from, it's kind of more. It's more interesting.
And I think, man, like parafever is like the best example. So we'll do a bonus, but I would say one of the big takeaways that I see, one of the issues, I see that a lot of people have a grievance with mandates and being told what to do. And that's subjectively, you're well within your right to do that. And throughout history, various lockdowns, various mandate, we'll get into this in the bonus episode. They failed over and over again, and they have various consequences. Like, for example, if you say, hey, no one can go to any business, like all of the wrong, like most infectious people will all go to like one area where they like sneak to, and that becomes this, this fucking vector, this hub for spread because of the constraints of it, or people hide their illness, or their stigma or whatever else.
Yeah, virus speakeasies.
I'm not for or against mandates, because that would depend on what the mandate was and what it's doing and everything else. All of that is to say is that certainly what is happening, like what a virus does and what causes it to transmit and what it will do in your chance of surviving and how much immunity you'll have after it and blah, blah, blah. Those are all objective realities. And now what to do about that, what policies to create, are subjective realities. And everyone's entitled to their own opinion and subjective reality and what their ideas of freedoms are. And we can like have a debate about that. I think where people run into trouble is then to take whatever they subjectively feel, whether they're pro-mandate, for mandate, whatever, and then scour through objective reality to cherry pick whatever validates it's just what their feeling is. Mm-hmm. And that's misusing like objective reality, or just denying or making up objective reality. And we all do this, and I find my own shit to validate my own opinion.
Yeah.
But
it's unfortunate that this is all occurring at like it's a peak moment of distrust in authority. Like it was just ramping up distrust in authority to where the bullet boy who cried wolf syndrome.
Yeah. And I mean, it's not like I have some trust in government or big pharma or whatever else, but although there's like crossover, as someone that has a science podcast, I think it's a little silly to think of scientists as authority, to lump them into that same umbrella, because that's like, are scientists respected? That hasn't been my experience of science. And it's also not the mainstream. Science isn't the mainstream. It might be told sometimes on like whatever mainstream news outlets, but
even the big ones, even Neil deGrasse Tyson is like thrilled if he sells 10,000 books.
Oh yeah.
He's like, it's great for a science book. I was thrilled to sell 10,000 copies.
Yeah, that's like remarkable. Hardly any of them have more than 1,000 Twitter followers or anything else. But it's I mean, what the mainstream's been the same that it's been for thousands of years, which is the mainstream point of view is to interpret things intuitively, to form superstitions, to form beliefs, to collect around religious ideals, to have your identity be and your in-group be more important to you than what reality may or may not be. And I would say that science is like the alternative perspective to what the mainstream perspective always was. Science was the thing that went, oh, actually the Earth isn't flat, despite our intuition, what everyone believes. Darwin said, I just saw this great quote yesterday. I wonder if
it gets muddy when we start talking about science versus whoever is in the role of the science gatekeeper, because at one point the science is that the Earth is flat. And people use that argument forever, the same way they say that Michael Jordan was cut from his high school basketball team and that Einstein failed math and stuff. Like, people love those little examples of...
Right. Yeah, but it was more the general population that took issue with, scientists enjoyed Galileo's work as they did Darwin's. It was
really?
For the majority. It was the Darwin said in a letter, he was like, if you had an idea that was going to outrage society, would you keep it to yourself? Because he was writing about evolution for like over a decade before he published, and he was like really reluctant to put out any of his findings because he knew ahead of time it was going to upset that was the norm. That was
what would be the equivalent of that now? Like, if we came from, I don't even know, for like the children of demons or something. But that must have been so earth-shaking. Like, you actually are not these divine sculptures of clay from God. You actually evolved from this thing that was like a shrew, which then became something like a monkey, but not a monkey.
I think it's just... I think that testing objective reality is just constantly uncovering things that aren't intuitive. In fact, it's just an easy thing to test. Like, oh, we think this. Is that true? Can that be falsified? If it wasn't true, what would it look like? And once in a while, you go, oh, surprise, it's not at all what we think that it is. And now you have a career as a scientist, and you study that weird thing about grasshoppers or whatever that defied what our intuition told us about them.
That's the weird thing about intuition, is that on one hand, it's follow your intuition. And then on the other hand, it's, it was counterintuitive. Looks like it was counterintuitive after all. And both of those we're all familiar with that dichotomy, I guess. So trust your intuition unless the thing is counterintuitive, then you got to do the opposite.
Yeah, and think about what formed your intuition, what evolutionary pressures formed your intuition, what life history formed your intuition, and learn a new instrument or hobby or sport and see how many. Do you have things like with music where you were learning, or with any of your art where like, oh, I would have thought that it would have been that way to draw it or play this, and then quickly realized that it was not. It was not what I intuitively would have thought. And then
one of my favorite Hendrix realizations is that he's always trying to make it easier on himself. And that's a good thing for someone trying to learn it, because you're like, oh, that's probably a crazy thing. And then you realize, no, he wanted to have a good time, and he found the laziest way to do it, the easiest fix, but it just doesn't occur to you naturally. You're just like, oh, it's just an inverse of this shape. Oh, that's crazy. Can't wait to add that to my toolkit.
And then once you add it to your toolkit and do it for long enough, gain mastery of it, then it becomes habit, which then we call intuition. So then it becomes intuition afterwards. So intuition's always changing and revising itself and just not terribly flexible.
Yeah, we make a fake history about it, like where it's like, yeah, I always had this. I always had that intuition, but no, you had it. You developed it 6 months ago.
Yeah, you built it. It's be mindful of that conscious story of like, my intuition is this stable, perfect thing that's always been there, always will be, and is tuned in with this perfect reality, because it's you'll find that that's not the case. Just learn any new thing, and if everything was intuitive, there would be nothing to learn. But
we would just be.
Instead, we learn things.
Yeah, it would just be one big flowing, boring thing. Perfect, flowing, boring thing.
So awesome. That was the first part of the pandemic history episode. We're going to do coming up. I think we're going to do potentially a spirituality. At the time that we're recording this, we're kind of getting ahead a little bit, but I think we're maybe going to do We just did a Christmas episode. I think we're maybe going to do a spirituality survey to see where we feel on the spiritual side. And we like the idea of doing one survey episode a month because those are fun. And then the other thing is we're kind of gearing up for New Year's and going to do some stuff with like setting goals and just rethinking practices. And so we're working on a few things coming up that are kind of relevant for this time in our lives. If you want to support the show until after Christmas, up until Christmas Day, you can join Patreon for 15% off if you get a year membership, where you'll get all of our bonus content. What do they get again, Ramin? Sometimes I forget because it blows my mind.
Well, you might have to shield your mind here because I don't want to have to reconstruct it again. That took a whole week. But you get bonus monthly episode of Mind Under Matter, a whole new episode. You get access to our whole series, which is a whole other podcast series, which is better than even this show, called Mind Under Art, where we go through art pieces that I made and we discuss those, suggested by you, the viewer. You also get access to all of, at the Honey Bear level, you get access to all of Shane's personal Patreon. You get access to my personal Patreon $5 level. You get access to both our specials, the video of it. You get access to the Discord. You get it all. You get everything you could possibly want and more. And up until what you said, Christmas, you can get 15% off an annual membership. Sign up for it. Also, the store.
And most importantly, you support us. If you're like, I have too many podcasts. You guys already crank out so much stuff. I listen to every episode and I don't have time for all of that bonus content. Well, one, you might even have more time for the bonus content than you do the regular episodes. How do you know unless you try? And two, you're supporting the show. We don't have ads. This is an ad-free show, and that's awesome. Listen to podcasts with ads and tell me if you think the ads are better. You ever watch a Netflix streaming show or HBO streaming and be like, boy, if only a commercial would interrupt this right now and sell me some fucking products I definitely don't need. If you felt that way, then awesome. But if you like that we don't have ads, support us this way. And maybe one day we won't have to blab so much at the end about it. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for everything that you do. And until next time,
keep on salivating, honeys. Ding.